I have chapters 8 and 9 in How to Read Literature Like a Professor. These chapters, titled Hansel D. and Greteldom and In Greek to Me, and in these chapters, the author explains who to borrow literature from that will provide a long-lasting reference. He comes up with an answer of myth, as he says, the shaping power and sustaining power of story and symbol, and fairy tale, because it answers his question, what can the writer use for parallels, analogies, plot structure, references that most of his readers will know? Here are some examples.
Hello, everybody. I have a question for you. Do you know who I am?
I have a question for you. Do you know who I am?
Do you know who I am?
Do you know who I am? Now, I bet you recognized the first three characters. Everybody knows the face of SpongeBob. And everybody knows the red cloak of Little Red Riding Hood. And most people will be able to recognize the trident of Poseidon. But what you don't know is my last reference, Betty Grable. Betty Grable was a popular film star from the 1940s. And even though everybody would have known her face in the 1940s, none of us recognized it today. So what does that tell us about literature and references when we're writing short stories? Well, it tells us that even though a reference is popular today, and has been for the past, 10 years, it doesn't mean it's going to still be popular in 100 years. So, what can we use? The answer is children's literature. We're all very familiar with kid literature thanks to stuff like Disney. Disney is very helpful in telling the stories of the Grimm fairy tales and other stuff like that. One example of this would be when Robert Coover wrote a short story called The Gingerbread House. The Gingerbread House really plays off of the story of Hansel and Gretel. In The Gingerbread House, there is an obvious allusion to Hansel and Gretel, even though their names are never stated. I mean, that's the only real difference, is that their names are never stated. But since you already know the story of Hansel and Gretel, Coover just leaves that part out of the story. The story takes place before the children have their inevitable fate, but there is still some foreshadowing when the witch rips out the heart of a dove, the dove being pure like the children. This also has a double menacing meaning. She is killing the dove, and the dove is the one who eats the breadcrumbs that the children left to find their way home. This story plays on readers' previous knowledge. You know the story of Hansel and Gretel, so when the story ends with the children innocently playing in a candy house, you're left with an innate sense of dread. Why are you left with a sense of dread when children are just playing in a house made of candy? Because you already know what happens next. This story is a good example of the usefulness of kid literature as illusion. The reader is expected to know the story before they even start reading, and it works, because whenever you are reading the stories of kid literature to children, and whenever oh, that's my microwave. Anyways, kid literature, it works. Another way to use illusion whenever you're writing a short story is through myth. Whenever you think of myth, what is the first thing that comes to your mind? Well, it's probably something to do with Greek and Roman, because it is ingrained in our minds to think about Greek and Roman myths. But there's Amanda. That is not the only myth that matters. Myth is simply a body of story that matters. We're going to talk today about myth as in shaping power of story and symbol. It doesn't matter whether a story is true or not in this context. It just matters the story's ability to help you explain what you're trying to explain. Now, every community has its own body of story that matters. This could be referred to as a literary canon. A literary canon being a master list of popular stories that matter during that time period. This is not a literal list. It is just in people's minds. Now, whenever we think myth, there is a lot of ways that we use myth in our culture. it is ingrained in our minds to think Greek and Roman. So we have towns called Troy and Athens. We have high schools called the Spartans and the Romans. And we name our cities after this. So obviously Greek myths also have some sort of staying power. Now, there are a lot of allusions to Icarus in the Greek and Roman myths. Icarus, we all know the story. He flies too close to the sun and his wax wings melt. Now, there have been allusions to Icarus in paintings and stories as far back as 1558 with Landscape with Fall of Icarus, to 1962 and today with Landscape with Fall of Icarus poem. Real exciting title. And painting means different things to different people. So, alright, why do myths have such an important place in literature? Because readers recognize them, just like kid literature. And this makes our experience of literature richer, deeper, and more meaningful. And this is what was trying to be expressed in How to Read Literature Like a Professor. It was saying that you can use myth to express yourself because a lot of people know it. People have borrowed from the myths for a long time. People started borrowing from Homer almost immediately. So whenever you're thinking about writing an allusion in a short story, the two things that you need to borrow from are Greek myths or kid literature. Thanks for watching How to Read Literature Like a Professor.